The alert tone hit the living room and Rook lunged at the television. I reacted before I understood why, my hand on the remote, my knees knocking against the coffee table. Suspicion had been a dull edge for days. When the tone started, that suspicion hardened into urgent attention and forced me forward. Rook kept his weight low, ears forward, eyes locked on the scan lines. He did not move toward me. He moved toward the glass. I pushed the remote and the set hummed louder under the emergency overlay. The room smelled of fried light bulb and burnt dust from the TV. I had been doing chores all evening. The neighborhood alert had come through as a brief text, then an official tone. Within the first 3 seconds after the system went live, every other dog on my street had vanished from doorways and porches. I watched shadows lift along fences and disappear through yards. I told myself to stay calm. Fear moved in my throat instead of my voice. Rook's growl was low and steady. He did not bark at doors where other animals had fled. He stared at the television until the flicker resolved into a vertical white silhouette, a smear edged with horizontal distortion. The figure glided from top to bottom of the screen like a torn film strip that never settled. I stepped closer and heard a second sound layer. The operator's voice, flat and measured, bleeding through the signal with a faint radio warble. "This is Broadcast 7, the voice said. "We are monitoring anomalous visual vectors. Shelter in place until advised otherwise," the voice named process and procedure. It gave authority. I said, "Operator, what is that on my screen?" My voice sounded thin in the quiet. Rook did not answer, but he braced, and his hackles rose in a straight line down his spine. My suspicion shifted into a tight questioning. I moved the couch cushion aside and found the dented metal tag on Rook's collar under my hand. The tag was warm from his body. I saw, etched shallow and almost polished by wear, a vertical red nick that ran through the stamped number. The nick matched the glitch on the screen. I told myself it could be a scratch. The operator's voice did not offer consolation. Containment advised. "Do not engage the visual field. Keep domestic animals secured and observe behavioral anomalies." The voice paused with a measured inhale. It sounded like someone reading a directive from a laminated sheet. It sounded professional. It sounded strained. I said, "Rook, come here." Rook's snout did not turn toward me. He leaned his weight forward and tapped the glass with a clip paw. The sound was small and wet against ancient plastic. The figure on the screen moved in perfect alignment with each of Rook's taps, as if the silhouette stepped toward the paw print left on the inside of the set. I put my palm flat on the glass. The surface hummed under my skin. An electric tang lifted my arm hair. Rook lunged, teeth bared, and his body collided with the screen. His paws slid on dust. He could not reach the thing away from the living room. A knock at the front door cut through the broadcast feed. The house went cold at that sound. Cold because the operator had warned about containment, and cold because someone knocking meant movement outside the controlled perimeter. The neighbor's voice called, "Sharp at the threshold, you hearing this? People are missing down the block." I opened the door and saw Mrs. Patel from across the street, her hair tucked under a nightcap, her eyes wide and wet. She did not look like herself. She looked like someone who had run to tell bad news. "Mrs. Patel," I said, "get inside." "Close the door." She pushed inside without asking. She kept talking. "They shelters were open," but her sentences broke. Rook moved between us and the hallway as if he could physically block her. He touched her shin with his nose and would not allow her to pass. "She your dog," he want to move. He let me get past him. She stared at Rook and then at me. Suspicion split into doubt. I doubted my ability to make the right choice in that moment. Mrs. Patel grabbed my sleeve. I saw lights blink at 3 houses down, and then a porch was empty. The dog on Maple was just gone. No blood, nothing. The crate was there. The dog was not. She spoke in short sentences. Her breath came quick. We should leave, but my car. She stopped. The operator overlaid another procedural line. "Do not evacuate via main thoroughfares. Do not create vectors. Await instruction. The voice gave orders that pulled me between two impulses. Run now, or obey procedure. I asked, did anyone see movement on cameras? Mrs. Patel answered, only static, then a shape, then nothing. She the word nothing as if it might be a mistake. The room filled with practical questions, keys, the spare radio, battery packs. I moved to the bookshelf, my hands searching. Every motion felt licensed by Rook's refusal to step away from the television. He rotated his head slowly, amber eyes flaring with an internal light. He growled when the figure leaned forward in the frame. Operator, I said into the phone, though the broadcast already fed through the set. Can you say what that is? The voice compressed. Visual appears to be an interstitial vector. It traverses domestic displays and correlates with targeted animal focus. Do not follow the figure. Keep line of sight interrupted by opaque barrier if possible. The operator's delivery was clipped, but the words landed with clarity. I slid a blanket over the set while Mrs. Patel clutched her coat. Rook resisted. He braced against the blanket as if it were a barrier between him and a wound. Doubt shifted to alarm when the figure on the screen stepped out of the television frame. There was no dramatic sound. The image simply stopped aligning with the display and resolved into the threshold of the living room, an elongated silhouette that sat in the doorway like a cutout. The static around its edges trembled. My stomach dropped as my hands moved without permission. I reached for Rook's collar and found the leather under my fingers, cool and steady. Done, go, I told Rook. He answered by pressing his body to my shin and turning his head to the shadow. Rook, I said again, voice small. Done, let it through, Mrs. Patel pleaded, we should leave. The street's unsafe. I could not move around Rook. He planted his paws and would not let me get to the hall. That decision, stay and listen, or leave and risk uncontained vectors, pressed at me like a physical force. The figure advanced without shifting weight. Its motion was mechanical, the kind of precise slide you see in old film reels where a projector sprocket skips a tooth. Rook made a sound that was half sneeze and half growl. He launched from the rug and hit the silhouette's edge. The room filled with a bloom of vertical static where his body met the space. For a heartbeat I saw nothing but noise and felt my clothes buzz with a tiny electric sting. Then the static cleared and Rook's place on the rug held only a smear of fine white dust and a single dented dog tag. I lunged, fingers scrabbling, to find him. My palms closed on empty carpet and a cold smear of residue. My breath came sharp and uneven. I called his name until my voice emptied. Mrs. Patel put her hand on my shoulder and said, we have to move. Now her hand was solid and insisted on motion. The operator cut in, voice warbling, stay where you are. Do not follow visual vectors beyond the display. Containment failure likely if cross-reference occurs. The directive pulled me opposite of Miss Patel's action. Panic moved through me in a pattern. Muscle, breath, decision. I tore at the blanket over the set to see if the figure had returned. The television showed an empty couch and a white paw print stamped faintly onto the glass. A red emblem, the same vertical aberration, sat askew in the corner of the screen. The operator's voice concluded a sentence, and then the signal stuttered. Rook's collar lay under my hand. The leather strap was warm, and the tag bore that same red nick. I could still feel his weight where he had been. I did what I had to do. I grabbed the collar and turned it in my palm, reading the dented tag until the number blurred. I took the tag and pressed it flat to the light. The vertical scar ran deeper than a mere scratch. It had a faintly different texture, like metal altered by heat, and then cooled with a straight seam. The physicality of that mark changed my understanding. This was not a projection alone. The contamination left material traces. Mrs. Patel paced the hallway and asked, will the operator tell us where Rook went? She spoke with quick sentences now, every syllable an attempt to make decisions out of data. I answered, no. The operator only gives containment. They cannot say where something moves. My voice had a new steadiness. I folded the collar into my pocket. The decision to carry that token felt like a promise. The operator's voice wavered and then steadied. We are recording increased cross-modal persistence. Rook class canid reaction recorded as sentinel behavior in at least 3 independent households. Do not touch markings. Report all anomalous pet behaviors to broadcast 7 only. The voice provided instructions that did not solve anything. It kept me in place because it asked me to wait. My hands trembled when I reached for the radio to log the event. That night the neighborhood became a series of lit rectangles with blacked-out windows. We listened to other people call out and ask for names. Chen from 2 doors down shouted that his security camera stopped at the exact moment a form filled his porch, and then nothing at all. Mrs. Patel, they were gone, just like she used short sentences and repeated names to anchor herself. Rook, rook. The repetition made the room real. Dialogue did the work of evidence while I moved through the motions of cataloging and containing. An external event shifted the tempo. A siren from the main road started, but it was distorted, cutting in and out. The operator Sauverlay flickered, and the words recalibration and do not approach blood together before the feed returned. I had to decide whether to follow the neighbor's urge to leave for the shelter or obey the broadcast's containment order. That decision was not theoretical. It required movement of my body, keys, and responsibility for a missing animal. I opened the front door to look at the street. Porch lights were on in sporadic patterns, and shadows moved behind curtains. A car engine started 2 houses down and then stopped. Silence fell back. I closed the door and turned the deadbolt. Mrs. Patel, lock it. Lock it. Don'ty go out. She peered around Rook's backside and kept repeating names like anchors. The repeated names and repeated commands stabilized our choices in real time. A mid-chapter reveal occurred when I found a receipt tucked under the couch cushion with an address written in ink the color of dried blood. The receipt was for a hardware store, dated 2 days earlier. On the back someone had written 3 vertical lines in a row like tally marks. I kept the receipt and showed it to Mrs. Patel. What do you think this means? She asked. She my name when she spoke. I answered, I don't know yet, but it's evidence. We keep it. The simple act of naming and storing physical items turned a private shock into an investigation. My suspicion moved into method. We set candles where the television's glow had been. Not because candles would stop the figure, but because a circle of predictable light felt like a tool. I drew the curtains and taped the blinds shut. I read the operator's instructions aloud and then repeated them as a checklist. We took inventory by speaking items out loud: radio, batteries, spare water, tag. Speech organized the room into tasks. Action replaced the vagueness of fear. The operator's voice came back in fractured bursts. Rook class sentinel indicates selective perception. Do not expose unprotected human subjects to direct line of sight. Report physical transference of aberrant markings. The voice phrase, transference of aberrant markings, made me look back at the tag again. I felt the weight of another emotion take root. Protective resolve. Where earlier I had been doubtful, now I moved with intent. I set the collar on a napkin and wrote time and date beside it. Then another external event. A message from my sister, sent and then retracted. Her name flashed on the phone with 1 word before it disappeared. Run. The message did not reach me fully. The operator's overlay showed message loss across the screen. The truncated warning functioned as a mini cliffhanger. It forced me into a narrow decision space. I had to choose whether to follow an unconfirmed personal warning or adhere to the broadcast's directive. I chose to stay. The figure's presence manifested again as a soft pull at the edges of the room, like static wrapping around a doorway. Rook's absence sat in an empty place on the rug. I crouched and put my face near the carpet where he had been, breathing in the patch of air that still smelled faintly of wet fur and earth. I could not invent comfort out of smell, only facts. The scent told me Rook had been here and left a trace. The chapter's climax arrived at the threshold. The television feed fractured. and the silhouette resolved into a tall shape in the doorway. I saw the edges ripple with scan lines, heard a low modulation under the operator's tone that vibrated the room. I stepped forward without thinking and found Rook between me and the figure's silhouette again, except this time his body was not whole. Where his flank had met the static space, the fur thinned into a lattice of white residue, and the carpet carried a smear. The figure reached with a hand that was a vertical red aberration. I grabbed at the hand's edge, palms meeting a cold metallic pull like a dead connector. My fingers closed on nothing, and the skin of my knuckles scraped plaster dust. I shouted, "Rook!" Mrs. Patel lunged to my side, and we fought over pulling him back. We each grabbed a paw. The operator's voice shrank into the static, and then returned with a long directive. Do not allow cross-reference. Seal the aperture with opaque material. Evacuations will be subject to later instruction. My hands burned from the effort of trying to hold what would not stay. Rook's paws slipped, and then the smear pulsed. He gave a single low yelp that I will hear forever in detail. The pitch, the sudden intake, the closing sound of breath. Then he was gone, and a white paw print remained on the rug, clear and wet, looking for a second before it dulled. My hands clenched nothing. Mrs. Patel was crying in short bursts now, each breath a small statement. Rook, Rook, Rook. Her cries were not poetic. They were account of loss. The operator's voice faltered, transmission integrity at risk. Stand by for further instructions. The feed then looped a cryptic end phrase I could not pass and collapsed into an abrupt wall of static. The television returned to a blank field with a red emblem smeared in one corner and a single, white canine paw print superimposed. The room felt smaller because the space Rook occupied had changed from presence to mark. I gathered the dented tag and placed it on the coffee table. I wrote details: time, what the figure looked like, the smell of ozone, the texture of the residue, each line short and factual. Mrs. Patel sat on the couch and tapped her foot. We should file this. We should tell someone who can do real tests. I answered, operator us to report. We do that first. Conversation moved us through grief and procedure in measured beats. The operator's last words before the static were a flat directive to stand by. I obeyed out of the habit of being an ordinary person in a system that gave rules. I stayed and listened to the residual hum and the low drone that matched the timing of Rook's departing breath. My suspicion had become grief. The two sat next to each other and pushed decisions into my hands. I taped the curtains closed and wrapped the TV in a blanket, feeling ridiculous and precise. We catalogued the evidence and spoke each fact aloud to keep it anchored. The receipt, the collar, the paw print on the screen, Mrs. Patel's witness report, the retracted message from my sister. Each item made the event less like a dream and more like an unfolding investigation. Mrs. Patel named each object and repeated names until she could say them without gasping. At one point I left the room to breathe, and Mrs. Patel called. Don't go far, I answered. I'm staying within the house. My voice was small and focused. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote down timestamps from memory. I felt the operator's presence in every instruction, as if the voice was an unseen hand organizing us. The procedural language gave me a place to act, and that steadied me in a way raw panic would not. Then the final external event, a soft at the back window. Both of us froze. Mrs. Patel whispered my name. I stood, every muscle aligned for motion. I moved to the window and peered through the taped blinds. Beyond the glass, the yard looked ordinary: lawn, fence, a trash can tipped over. For a second I thought I had imagined the sound. Then the radio in the kitchen popped, and the operator's voice returned with one final order. Await, do not engage, and preserve physical evidence. The feed broke and fell into static again. I wrapped Rook's collar in the napkin, put it into a small box, and locked it in the top drawer with the receipt and the photograph I had taken of the paw print on the television screen. Closing the drawer felt like closing a case file for now. It did not resolve anything, but it set a tangible boundary around what had happened. Mrs. Patel sat with her hands folded. The two of us had become a team of witnesses by necessity. Before dawn, the neighborhood fell into a brittle quiet. We sat with the radio on low, listening for the operator's return. When morning came, the channel carried only a test tone and a loop of weather data. I left the television covered and took the dog tag with me when I checked the porch for tracks. There were no clear paw prints in the frost, only faint heel marks from a neighbor's shoe. The tangible traces of Rook's existence had been reduced to dented metal and residue that would not answer questions. I do not know whether the operator's instructions delayed more disappearances or preserved anything at all. What I do know is this. Rook had watched the screen longer than any other animal nearby. He had stood between me and whatever moved through my living room, and was taken where I could not follow. The final image on the television was a white paw print laid over a tilted red emblem. The static closed in around that frame and the signal died. I wrote my report to Broadcast 7 with short, factual sentences and attached the photograph of the paw print. I typed the timestamps and listed the physical items I had collected. Then I waited. When the feed cut to static, I heard no consoling phrase, only the operator's earlier directive looping in my head. Preserve physical evidence. I put the box with the collar into a cardboard file and labeled it with the date. I placed the file on the shelf under the radio. The night ended with a physical action, not a thought. I closed the drawer, locked the front door, and slid a chair under the knob as an extra measure. Mrs. Patel half closed her eyes on the couch and kept calling Rook's name in the occasional breath. I lay awake with the radio's low hum and the imprint of that one white paw print in my view. The last concrete thing I did before sleep was to stand at the television and press my palm against the blanket covering the screen. I felt nothing through the cloth, but warmth from the set, and the faint smear of residue where the image had been. An abrupt silence settled, the kind that follows a reset. It left me with live evidence in a box, a report sent, a neighbor keeper of names. The chapter closed on a small, concrete act, taping the blanket over the set, saving the tag in the drawer, calling Broadcast 7 with short, precise sentences. The signal might return. I left the radio tuned and the drawer locked. The white paw print on the screen and the dented red marked tag became the only things that proved Rook had been here and that something else had reached across a display and taken him. I turned off the kitchen light and heard Mrs. Patel say, "Stand by." I answered, "Stand by," and then moved to sit by the covered television, listening for the next instruction. The front door was open when I patched the feed into the channel, and Rook would not let anyone cross the threshold. Suspicion drove me to keep that camera live. I had suspected these patterns since the first living room clip where Rook lunged at the television. The householder stood on the stoop, hand on the jamb, breathing sharp and loud enough for the mic to pick up. The dog planted both paws on the threshold and stared down the hallway at a vertical red streak crawling along the plaster. I did not wait for permission. I flagged the feed for archival and overlaid the incident id. My voice was calm, procedural, but my hands tightened on the console. The householder said, "Operator, the door," and then stopped, eyes on Rook. "Rook, what are you doing?" the householder demanded. Rook did not look at the householder. He kept his stance, low and rigid, every muscle locked. He let out a single low growl that matched the drone under my feed. That growl changed the room. It was not a noise of play or alarm. It was an animal fixing on something only he could map. My emotion root, suspicion, sat behind every instruction I sent. I ordered the overlay to mark the doorway as a containment concern and told the householder to step back. "Step back," I said. "Householder, step back from the threshold." The householder's voice cracked. "I am not leaving my house," they said. They used their name, Maria, into the open mic. I could hear the doorknob scrape as she tried to close the door. Rook shifted his weight forward and planted himself in place. I told her to stop. Maria, do not close the door. Do not cross the threshold until instructed. The line tightened into static for a beat, and a neighbor's voice cut in, sharp with fear. Operator. This is Marta 2 houses down. Our basement light went out and my dog is gone. Marta's voice snapped into the feed, and then a second line cuffed. There's a bruise of static on my doorway, she said. It looks like paint that's sweating. She described the edge of the pattern in her hallway as I watched the vertical streak move in the live image. I began cross-referencing archived instances as I spoke. Marta described the mark. Size, color, shape. I keyed the archive and pulled up 2 other incidents with similar descriptions. The householder on the line, Maria, said, "You pulled up Rook from the other day, didn't you? The one that lunged at the TV." She named him like a person. "Yes," I answered. "We have multiple correlated incidents." "Do not enter the hallway. Stand down." Maria used a breathy, short sentence. "I can leave the house open." She shoved the jam and the door scraped. Rook leaned against the frame and stiffened. I sent a directive. Cut power to interior screens if safe, and barricade doors with heavy furniture while maintaining the live feed. Maria tried to shut the inside lights. She reached for the switch, but Rook blocked her hand. "Rook," she hissed. "Rook, get." She pulled at the dog and he held fast. Her grip on his collar tightened, and her voice rose, not commanding but panicked. "Let go of him," I said. "Maria, let go. Breathe and let him do what he is doing." Maria's fingers loosened around the worn leather collar. The metal tag chimed against her wrist. "He won't move," she said. "He is stuck." Rook's amber eyes shone in the monochrome feed, reflective and narrow. A faint dent on his metal tag caught the scan line and flashed like a brief white cut. I paged Marta again and asked for a raw image of her doorway. While she spoke, the camera in Maria's living room swung, jostled by her step back, and the television in the corner flickered to life on its own for a single frame. The screen showed a high, contrast silhouette of a tall figure aligned with Maria's hallway. The figure's outline matched the hall's geometry exactly, like a negative that filled the space. Maria shouted, "What is that?" Her voice went thin. I replayed the single frame and expanded the contrast. The vertical red aberration preceded the silhouette by a fraction of a second. It crawled on the wall like fresh paint. I cut between frames and found the same aberration in Marta's doorway clip. Marta, it crawled the wall toward my stairs. Then my dog, her line collapsed into a scream on the neighbor channel, and then cut to an empty hallway. My team and I began the containment checklist aloud as we worked. "Cut interior screens," I said. "Secure perimeter cameras. Do not allow anyone inside the house. Walk." I said the steps with clipped breaths, because the checklist kept us organized and because it bought time. Maria and Marta followed the directions through short, clipped responses. "Okay, Maria, okay. Doing it. Doing it now, Marta." I locked the basement. I thought that would help. "My dog is gone." We tried to sever the visual link. Maria reached the TV and pulled the plug. The screen went blank and left behind a shimmer of residual scan lines. For a moment the hall was ordinary. A white runner, coat hooks, a framed family photo with a dented corner. Rook did not relax. He kept his gaze where the screen had shown the silhouette and lowered his head in a defensive set. I told Maria to barricade the door from the inside with the couch. She slid the couch across the threshold with a grunt. The camera shook with the motion and showed the couch wedged by the door. I told her to block the windows. Maria moved with tense, short motions, carrying the woven blanket and slamming it over a side window. As we worked, Marta sent an image. Her doorway bore the same vertical scar of static, a pale smear with a thin red line slicing down the center. The smear had a texture like dried oil that had cracked in ridges. I isolated the frame and magnified it. Within the smear, tiny hairline scratches looked like footprints, a pattern that repeated at irregular intervals. "Those are paw imprints." Marta into the feed. "Small. Like a puppy," she whispered, and then louder, said my Maya was small. "She would fit those marks." Her voice broke. Maria swore, so it's taking them. Her hands bunched the blanket. She turned to Rook and said, "Not you. Not you, listen to me." Rook's tail did not wag. He kept his teeth bared a fraction longer, and the camera picked up the rise of saliva at his lip. He made a single step forward so that his chest brushed the cracked plaster by the doorway. I felt the doubt shift in me. Doubt arrived as a cold technical question. Had we misread the pattern? But fear followed fast. Rook's single step coincided with a small bloom of red on the plaster that expanded like spilled dye. The bloom made the hair on Maria's forearm stand visible on the feed. She reached for the door bolt and found it scorching hot to the touch. She recoiled, breath scraping. I ordered immediate evacuation protocols for the neighboring houses and instructed Marta to remain on her porch while we dispatched a response team. Marta objected. "I want to get Maya back," she said. "I want to go in." Her tone snapped into panic. Maria shouted, "Marta, done tea!" And then to me, "Operator, she can tea." I cut the channel briefly to give Maria a chance to compose herself. When I restored the line, Marta was quieter. "I can tea, just leave her," she said. We argued over the line. I told Marta the attempt would disrupt more nodes. She argued with me back. "You heard her," she said. "My dog is in there." "Marta, you will not enter the house," I said. "You will wait with the perimeter team. You will not expose yourself." The exchange tightened into fast lines. "Marta, listen to me," I said. "Listen, I hear you," she shot back. "But I am not living without her." There were 3 quick breaths, and then a bang on Marta's porch door that made her drop the phone. She darted to the door in the video, and the camera showed nothing but her shaking frame. Every 3-5 paragraphs an event must alter the scene. The next event arrived as a screen sync revelation. Maria's living room television, dark for minutes, blinked back to life on its own. The black and white image filled the screen with high contrast noise and then settled into the silhouette of the figure standing perfectly within Maria's hallway geometry. The camera caught a detail I had missed. The silhouette's center line was a continuous vertical red aberration that shimmered and pulsed with faint internal movement. Rook reacted by pinning his ears back and fixating on the screen. He moved away from the door and toward the television as if the threshold and the screen were now the same plane. Maria tried to pull him back and he resisted. "Rook, no," she pleaded. "Done tea, go." The dog's body was rigid. His muscles quivered. He let out a low, controlled growl and then barked once, a short, sharp sound. I keyed the archive and overlaid geometry maps. The silhouette's proportions matched the dimensions of Maria's hallway down to the placement of the coat hook and the photo frame. It was not a general figure. It was a precise spatial template. The figure was cinched to the house. "It matches," I said. "It matches your hallway. It is mapping physical coordinates to broadcast frames." Marta made a noise on the line that might have been a laugh or a sob. "So it's learning houses?" she asked. "It's not learning," I said. "It's using them. It's using the signal to reconstruct interior space." Maria moved to the television with quick, jerky steps and tried to rip the set from its stand. The cords pulled, the set tilted, and the image fractured into jagged scan lines. The silhouette slid across those lines and buckled at the edge as if stepping through. Rook lunged and planted himself between the set and the doorway. He slammed his shoulder into the underside of the TV stand, and it shifted. Maria dropped on her knees and wrestled with the set. The operator team's channel lit up. Someone within the control room read an anomaly. A thin audio channel under the feed was carrying a subsonic modulation that matched a PET heartbeat signature. We isolated it and found that the modulation aligned with Rook's growl pattern. The signal had become bi-directional. Animal reaction modulating the contaminated broadcast. At that moment, the neighbor line erupted into distant screams and then silence. I monitored multiple frequencies and found one odd clip. A door at Marta's house slamming and a single animal sound, sharp and high, then nothing. Marta sobbed into the mic and then said, "I saw paw prints on my steps." Fresh. Then the feed went. Her voice cut out. The failed containment attempt followed. Maria cut power to the outside cameras in a panicked move, thinking darkness would hide the house. The hallway light snapped off, and with it the living room plunged into near black. In the dark, the red aberration glowed thin and vertical down the hallway with a cold internal pulse. The couch scraped and the front door groaned as it settled against the blockade. I told Maria to stop cutting feeds. She argued, and I heard the edge of panic harden into anger. "Operator, I'm trying to keep my house," she said. "Help me keep my house, then follow the checklist." I replied, "Stay put and patch the feed." "Hold the line." There was rapid back and forth for 3 exchanges where Maria pleaded, and I repeated procedural steps. Rook thumped his tail once and then lunged through the thin red bloom. The climax was immediate and brutal. The figure advanced through the doorway as a surge of corrupted signal. The red line in the hall deepened and a bloom of static poured like wet ink across the wallpaper. Rook drove forward into the aberration, and the feed collapsed into violent distortion. The camera feed broke into fast strobing frames and then into blocks of static. On the other end of the burst, we recovered a scrambled image. The doorway showed ragged ritual, like streaks, and either Rook was gone in a single frame or his body lay torn and motionless in a brief, washed-out line. Maria screamed and grabbed for him. Her hands found only fur and then air. She dropped to her knees, fingers digging into fiber, and called his name in short, guttural lines. "Rook! Rook!" She shouted, "Where are you?" There was a pause as she clawed the floor. We stabilized the feed enough to see the doorway. 2 things were clear. The smear across the threshold now bore repeated canine prints, stamped into the static, and the vertical red aberration had a new element, a faint echo of a dented metal tag reflecting light inside it. The dent looked like Rook's collar mark. I ordered full archiving and flagged the incident as a containment failure. Then I did the thing we had avoided. I pulled the clip into the control archive and stepped away from the live overlay to preserve a raw copy. The footage we stored showed the hallmark of a transformation. The floor fibers at the threshold were blackened in streaks, and the plaster bore a pattern of scratches that matched paw print spacing. The neighbor line came back with an incoherent sound. "Marta, it moved through my hall too. It left prints. It took." Her sentence snapped off. In the immediate aftermath, Maria sat on the floor with her hands on her knees and kept calling Rook's name in a loop of short phrases. "Rook, where are you? Rook, answer me." She spoke in fragments that fit into the room like nails. I could hear her chest heaving. The control room sent a unit to the street, and I told them to bring blankets and a containment kit. We found one small piece of evidence in the archive that changed how we understood the pattern. When I zoomed on the dented tag that flashed inside the red aberration, the reflection within it showed not a hallway, but a narrow strip of static with a stamped emblem. A warped emergency sigil with a canine paw print at its center. The paw print looked stamped, not erased. It was part of the signal itself. The tag had become a mirror into the broadcast. Marta called back a half-hour later and, despite my instructions to remain at the perimeter, she had gone to her porch and brought what she found. A ragged chew toy with a smear of what looked like dried ash and a small tuft of gray fur. She held it up to the shared line. "I found this on my step," she said. "It wasn't there before." "I don't know how it got there." Her voice trembled but did not break. We made decisions that night out of urgency more than certainty. I authorized the temporary quarantine of the immediate block and ordered that no connected display be powered within a 10-house radius until patch verification. Maria refused to be moved and refused to let responders take the television. She sat in the dark by the couch with her knees pulled to her chest and kept listening to the street outside. There was a slower shift in me then, from suspicion to methodical dread and into a thin resolve. I had to document and label what we had seen. I called up the previous case notes and tagged this incident to the first. The architecture of the signal now looked intentional. It used domestic geometries, it synchronized with Pet's reactions, and it encoded what looked like a ritual trace into physical thresholds. We cataloged 3 immediate facts. 1. Rook had engaged the aberration and then gone through or been taken. 2. The vertical red line synchronized with room geometry and could appear both on screen and on actual walls. 3. Pore impressions were embedded in the static pattern and occasionally transferred to physical surfaces. These were concrete, testable items we could use to instruct civilians. Maria crawled to the doorway and pressed her hand to the plaster where the red line had been. Her fingers came away dusty with a fine black residue. It smells like burnt film. The camera picked up the scent detail in my log as a recorded note. I told her to leave her hand there and to keep talking to me. Tell me what you remember, I said. She spoke in short sentences, each one a physical action. He barked at the TV the other night, she said. He wouldn't sleep when the alert played. I thought he was territorial, I thought it was nothing. Then the tone came, and he lunged. He saved us once. He saved us from... She could not finish the sentence. I looped that memory into our archive notes and flagged it as a potential protective behavior. The twist we logged that night changed the way we would brief responders. A dog's reaction was sometimes an early warning and sometimes a direct intervention. Rook's action was protective, not reckless. We closed the feed to the public, but left the recording on institutional channels and added a quarantine overlay to the CASA file. Maria remained sitting by the couch. Marta returned to her porch and left the chew toy on the step beneath the tape. The control room issued a short bulletin. Avoid powering displays connected to public frequencies and report any vertical aberrations immediately. In the control archive, I pulled up the clip again. The last frame we had before the feed collapsed showed Maria on her knees, and Rook's collar flashing a single white cut of light as the red aberration surged. The dent in his tag was visible. I froze on that frame and exported a high contrast still. In the still, the tag reflection contained the warped emblem with the footmark. I closed the file and felt the small, physical reaction of a tight jaw. The team in the control room spoke in short sentences as they catalogued evidence. Document the paw print pattern, one said. Run chemical analysis on plaster residue. Another replied. The reporters wanted to know, but we limited access. We had to be precise in our directives. At 2 a.m., after the street units had cleared and a temporary perimeter had been set, Maria stood and walked to the doorway. She did not open the door. She traced the outline of the outline on the plaster with the tip of her finger, and then whispered, "If you come back, Rook, come back to me." She closed her hand slowly and left a single smear of residue on her palm. Before I cut the live channel, I saved the clip to the high security archive and pulled the emblem overlay into the incident file. Then I issued a quiet directive to the field teams to record any prints and to collect any dented metal tags found within 5 houses of the incident. The final image we circulated for internal use was the symbolic epilogue. A black field with a single canine paw print stamped over a warped emergency emblem, the white print smeared at the edges by static. The clip looped once more, and then the feed sustained a long, low ring of analog tone before collapsing into looped static. The chapter ends with a clear sitting action. Maria hears a knock at the door and starts, then stands and moves to the peep window. She does not open it. She lifts the chain and peers through the slot. Outside, a uniformed responder holds a sealed evidence bag and calls her name in short, professional phrases. "Ma'am, we found something on the stoop. May I come in?" Maria slides the chain. She takes a shallow breath and answers in a single sentence. "Bring it here and place it on the mat." The line closes on the sound of the bag hitting the front step and the metal tag clinking inside it. We logged the event as case 2, doorstep signal, and linked it to the earlier living room incident. The record ends with the control archive receiving the new clip, that loops a distorted canine paw print over the warped emergency emblem, then collapses into endless static. The last entry is procedural: contain monitor, do not power, and stand by for further instructions. The relay van hummed and the living room set tore a white strip across its center. Rook slammed forward, teeth flashing, and I cut through open air with a warning into the feed. Suspicion sat at the base of my chest the way a warning light sits on a dashboard. Small, constant, impossible to ignore. I said, "Hold the door, Marla," into the earpiece, and the door, staying half open, became the central problem. Someone might step across that threshold while the image advanced on the screen. The contaminated vector had already shown us its behavior once, a dog lunging at a television and forcing human hands to act. That pattern dictated my first decision, and I made it while watching Rook press his paws against the glass image. I am Operator 7. I wear an institutional grey shirt, an ID badge, and a wireless earpiece that catches the room's static and the tiniest shifts in someone's voice. The relay wound of solder and disinfectant. My hands smelled of paper and ozone from the portable consoles. In the 5 sentences after Rook's movement, my role was clear. Keep the feed alive, translate what we saw into procedure, and prevent anyone from converting the signal into an aperture. Suspicion moved my feet first. I reached for the feed controls because the records from the earlier clip, Rook lunging at the television in case 1, had taught me that animals detect more than we do on the line. That memory came not as a mood, but as a recording. The clip in which Rook's body tensed before the figure resolved on the screen. I had played it twice that afternoon and told myself then to treat the pattern like an emergent rule. "Marla, step back," I said into the mic. My voice did not carry the panic I felt. It carried instruction. Marla obeyed, but she kept one hand on the jam. Liam crouched over a diagnostic tablet behind me, fingers tapping like a staccato rain on glass. Marla's knuckles showed white where she held the frame. Rook would not let her cross. That refusal was not stubbornness. It was a physical demand. Liam looked up. "Operator, I'm pulling a spectral packet through. There's a preface signature that matches the first field clip." His sentences were clipped. The technician's vocabulary was built of keys and counts. If we sever the feed now, we lose the packet trace. If we keep it, the aperture could form. "We have a missing child upstairs," I said, and the van fell quiet enough for the static to be audible on its own. Saying missing turned an abstract hazard into a direct personal obligation. Before this night, the contamination had been a signal problem. Now it was a human rescue problem. Marla's voice came thin through the doorway. "My boy, where is he?" She the name and immediately covered her mouth. She had a child's blanket clutched in one hand, a smear of ash along its edge. The blanket turned the unknown into a person I could not set aside. Suspicion shifted to urgency. I told Liam to hold diagnostics in passive loop and told Marla to stay at the threshold. Those orders were small acts that carried the weight of preventing another disappearance. We had learned rules across 2 previous cases that mattered here. In case 1, Rook lunged at the television and forced a hurried, panicked dive at the remote. The clip ended with a rag dropped to static and a dented badge. In case 2, the front door opened while a feed ran and Rook refused to let anyone cross. That footage had devolved into a doorway frame smeared with scanlins. Those recordings were not memory fog. They were concrete times and images I replayed in my head. Rook's teeth against the television glass, the open door with a hand frozen on the jamb. In the relay van, those 2 images pressed at my decisions now. Liam pointed at the tablet. "See this." He tapped a cluster of converging vectors on the map. "They converge on this street in a 20-meter radius." The packet prefixes with the ritual stamp, tiny singed prints, low frequency modulation, then the figure resolves. "It's directing itself, directed toward houses where dogs don't hide," I said. "Directed toward houses with dogs that bark or stand guard." My suspicion slid into a reading of intent. The contamination behaved like a vector with a destination. Marla jabbed her hand into the doorway. Please, operator. I can tee my son. Her voice broke and she stepped forward despite Rook. The dog's body pressed between her and the interior. He did not snap at her. He braced and gritted his teeth as if resisting being pulled away. Rook's eyes shone amber and tracked the screen. I watched Rook breathe. His panting matched the low drone in the background hum. That matching was a small technical detail that felt like evidence. Stay put, Marla, I said. Liam, isolate the packet. Pull playback at 40%. We need to see the preface again. The commands were procedural, but the stakes had edged toward rescue. Liam's hands moved fast. He called back short sentences. Sequestration engaged. I can isolate the signature, but it will weaken the feed render. If it collapses, the figure may stop. If it collapses too late, it may fold a doorway. The living room camera went black for a breath, and then opened on horizontal distortion. The figure resolved, a pale, elongated silhouette, featureless except for a vertical red aberration slicing its center. Rook launched at the screen as if to catch the figure in the glass. He bit at the image and his jaws met nothing but vibrating air, but the sound the camera picked up was a wet, tearing noise, and the screen burned a thin red mark where his teeth had struck. Marla hissed and lunged in one blurred motion. Marla, stop, I said. My voice had an edge now. Marla, stay with me. She froze with one boot half on the stoop and one boot on the threshold. Liam, can you hold the stream? I can slow it, but it preserves the preface. There are tiny scorch marks in the packet that match the prints from the second house. Those prints, he swallowed the rest. They trail toward the screen, an external event. Someone screamed 2 houses down, sharp and brief, and the van's windows picked it up and blurred it in the feed. The street reacted in the background. A light flicked off, a car alarm chimed once, then silence. That sound tightened the decision. We could keep the feed and risk the aperture folding. We could sever and risk losing the child's last known trace. Every option reduced to harm. I remembered the dog tag we found in case 1, dented, half smudged, with 2 initials that matched a registry. That memory became a tool. We used the tag's dent pattern to search the metadata and found a match to other households. The matches clustered along the vectors Liam had shown. The technical reveal became a plot twist. The contamination wasn't T-random. It targeted houses tied by small, overlooked items, worn collars, metal tags with dents, the frequency of human touch. That detail changed our approach. We weren't just watching for appearance. We were watching for objects that anchored the contamination. Operator Liam, pressing a pad with the gentle force of someone who knows how to break things slowly. We can loop the preface and try to lure the figure into the loop away from the house. But we need a sacrificial anchor, an eddy in the signal. We can use a dummy feed, but we have to attach a tag signature to it. Where do we get a tag? Marla demanded, you want me to leave my son? She barked the question in a single line, and it landed like a physical strike. Her voice was raw and short. No, I said, not your son. The tag from the console, Rook's metal tag. If we detach it and burn a small notch, we can inject the signature into the dummy feed. Liam, prepare a loop. Marla, stay with the jam. Marla hesitated for a single, precise heartbeat. Rook's body stiffened, and he growled a low sound that pressed the air. The growl was not threat, it was instruction. For the first time that night my suspicion shifted into clarity. Rook's perception gave us tactical data. Rook was not merely reacting, he was pointing. Marla, Rook 1T let go. Her sentence was a plea and an order to herself. She crouched and pried Rook's collar loose with clumsy fingers. Rook's metal tag dropped into her palm. The collar slid off like a strap. Rook paced and did not run. He kept one paw on the threshold. That contact jarred him to the house physically, even as his eyes tracked the screen. Liam set up the dummy feed in 30 seconds that felt like 3. He bored a tiny notch into the tag with a field tool and fed the tag-S signal into a portable transmitter. The dummy feed flickered like a heartbeat, and then held a mirrored image of the living room with a thin white strip down its center. The figure appeared in the dummy feed first, as if lured by a bait. It moved slower there, dislodged from the house camera, and for one horrible set of frames the VAN's console registered a vertical fold as the figure tested the dummy aperture. The mid-chapter cliffhanger arrived when the child's bedroom camera, one we had left on low contrast sweep, registered an empty bed and a cluster of tiny, singed paw prints leading away from the low wall toward the living room, exactly as we feared. No one spoke for a count of seconds long enough for the VAN's humming to sound obscene. That discovery refocused us. This was not containment. This was a rescue attempt in miniature. We had to choose whether to follow the trail inside the house or keep isolating the signal from the outside. Marla started forward, then stopped because Rook braced and laid his head along the threshold rail, eyes still on the screen. "He won't let me," she said. She kept repeating the phrase like a mantra. Her hands shook so the blanket slipped. Rook's jaw clicked once on nothing and then unlatched. He turned to the bedroom door and pawed at the floor in the child's room, nudging toward the path of prints. That nudge told us that the missing person had vanished into vapor. Something had moved along the floor, leaving a scorched trail designed to be read by a dog. The prints were small and singed, not human at full size. That specificity suggested the figure's method. It took the child through some mediated space and left ritual traces meant for animals to mark. Arguments broke out. Liam argued for cutting the feed entirely, saying, "If we collapse the signal now, we stop all vectors. We lose the child's trail, but we stop the figure." Marla argued we had to go in. "My son is in there, operator." "I will not wait while you play with signals." Her lines came fast. They were 3 short strikes. I countered with procedural restraint. "If you cross, you may carry the contamination. If you carry it, the figure will follow. We need to remove the signature from the house first." Liam offered a third option. "We use the dummy to draw the figure out, then go in with a containment ladder, grab the child and exit. The exchange had the required rapid back. And fourth." Each line was short, named, and revealed motive. Marla's voice rose and fell. Liam's remained technical. Mine stayed flat and directive. We had arrived at a contested decision, and the disagreement itself moved the plot forward. I chose containment first. I ordered Marla to remain on the threshold and to do a simple thing. Press her palm to Rook's flank and hold him steady. "Marla," I said, count breaths with him. 1, 2, 3. "Don't turn your back on the room. Don't step inside." She obeyed. Her hands hovered like a fragile stopgap. Rook calmed enough to keep his body between the doorway and the interior. Liam fed the modified tag signature into the dummy loop, and the figure leaned into the traced line. The dummy feed flared white, and the figure resolved fully within that loop. It tested the edges, and for a moment it seemed to hesitate between worlds. Then the figure did something new. It reached out with that vertical red aberration and folded a doorway within the dummy feed's frame. The doorway's edges jittered like a bad splice. The fold lasted no more than a breath. Rook lunged at it, and this is where physical action blurred with signal behavior. Rook's body pushed against the VAN's camera view, and the living room camera recorded him slamming into nothing where the doorway had been seconds before. The living room set threw up a thin bloom of red in the aperture's place. The child's blanket fluttered on the bed as if moved by a breeze. We moved to the climax as the figure consolidated the aperture at the actual living room screen. Liam yelled, "Now!" I hit the sever control to collapse the primary feed and punched the dummy loop into full power. The VAN's console screamed into thick interference. The field monitors displayed white noise. The feed didn't collapse cleanly. Signals don't in the field. They arc and snarl. The figure's outline elongated and then folded, and for a small cluster of frames the doorway materialized in the real living room wall. A bright vertical seam that hummed and showed a thin, wavering red line down its center. Rook bounded forward, placing himself along the seam, teeth bared. Marla shoved past him in a motion that was furious and exact. She reached into the aperture and grabbed air where her child should have been. Her fingers closed on nothing, and then on cloth. She pulled and brought back a pair of pajama pants slick with a white residue and a scrim of ash. She screamed a single, clean sound and then stilled because there was no child in her arms. I could hear the rustle of her breath change as adrenaline and dread traded places. I hit a manual lock on the seam, a technical seizure meant to freeze the aperture S frames. Now, Liam, I said, push the loop all the way. Pull everything into the dummy, leave the house feed isolated. Liam's hands moved like a surgeon's. He pulled sliders and pressed hard on a kill switch. The dummy burned brighter, the reel set dimmed. The seam in the living room wavered and flickered. The figure slid halfway into the dummy aperture. It did not retreat. It moved as if dragged by a mechanical talon. The child's cry, sharp and thin, blew through the living room feed and then snapped off at the seam. The Van S speakers caught something else under it, a low-frequency modulation that matched Rook's panting rhythm. Rook planted his chest against the seam. He did not let go. He whined once and pushed his head through the seam.
Marla screamed, "No!"
She lunged and wrapped herself around Rook's neck as if clinging could tether him. We lost the living room camera feed in a burst of interference that showed only a smear of red, and then black. The Van S consoles must have registered a microfold, because every monitor flickered off for a count long enough to feel like an eternity. When the cameras reinitialized, the living room was emptied of human silhouette, but marked by torn fabric near the television, a dented dog tag on the floor, and a smear of white where the figure's outline had been. Rook lay on the carpet, breathing hard but alive. Marla sat on the floor and held the child's pajama top to her face, sobbing with the raggedness of someone who had felt the edges of a loss and then nearly experienced it. I crawled to the doorway and found a line of singed paw prints that stopped at the television and folded back toward the child's room. They were small and detailed. Claw marks, tiny loops where small toes had curled. The prints ended in a pattern that matched the burn on the collar tag. That detail, the tag serving as a vector anchor, gave us the technical how. It also gave us a human why. The figure used templates it could attach to metal signatures and to animal perception to select its targets. Our earlier assumption that the contamination targeted houses of animals had been right, but incomplete. It sought items that carried human touch and animal proximity. Marla whispered, "My son smelled like the blanket and the tag." She the sentence like it had weight. "He always sleeps with his collar tag under his pillow. He likes the jingling. He did that so his mother could find him if he woke up," I answered. My voice was flat. I did not offer comfort. I offered an observation. It mattered. Observing the child's habit gave us a policy vector we could implement. Households should remove tags and store collars away from sleeping children during alerts. That was a small procedural change, but it might stop future matches. We ran a quick forensic loop. Liam fed the dent profile of the tag into the database and traced 3 other households with similar marks. Each had a pet that had been calm until the alert, then either retreated into closets or, in one recorded case, bolted to the television and slammed its body into the screen until the monitor warped. The pattern was consistent and specific. We had moved a theoretical contamination into a profile with signatures and mitigation steps. Emotion shifted twice more as we moved into aftermath, from fear into exhausted resolve, then into a tight, procedural grief. Marla's movements were small and precise. She wrapped the child's blanket around Rook's collar and then folded it into a plastic bin. She did not cry openly, but her hands trembled. Rook rested his head on her lap and closed his eyes in a way that looked like a dog finally allowed to sleep after a guard shift. Liam packed his gear with clean, mechanical movements. The 3 of us worked in silence that held more information than any spoken line. We recorded a safety directive into the corrupted channel as the final act of the chapter. I read it flat and precise. Remove metallic tags from collars during active alerts. Keep open thresholds supervised. If an animal refuses a doorway, do not cross it alone. I paused after each directive and felt the air shift. The directive was not a moral. It was an instruction tailored to behavior. It encoded what we had learned. The figure used human objects and animal perception as vectors. The last external event occurred when the feed looped one last time and showed a brief frame we had missed. A child's small hand pressed briefly against the television glass before the seam folded. The frame was so quick we might have missed it, if not for the dummy feed's slowed playback. That image changed the meaning of what we had done. The child had reached toward the screen, either drawn or concerned, and the figure had taken advantage of that contact. The reveal suggested figure's interest in direct human touch as an activation mode. I ended the transmission by switching the channel to a procedural log and cueing archival capture. The console saved the loop under a restricted flag. We cataloged the child's home, the dented tag, and Rook's collar as an evidence packet. Marla signed a short, disoriented statement. Liam filed diagnostics and then updated the anomaly map with the new vector data. The records were cold but specific, and they were what the institutional voice required. At the van's rear, we strapped Rook into a blanket and wrapped the child's pajama top in a sealed bag. Marla spoke once, 2 short lines. Can I carry him? Can he go with us? She both as a question and as a plea. Yes, I said. He goes with us tonight. He comes to the holding facility for observation. The decision was concrete and immediate. It resolved a choice that had been pending since the clip. Marla stood, folded the blanket around Rook, and held him to her chest. She did not make any statements about destiny or fate. She put her keys into her pocket and stepped out of the house with measured, precise motions. As we powered down the dummy feed and sealed the day as logs, I recorded one final line into the channel. Monitor the frequency for updates. Keep tags and collars stored separately during active alerts. If your animal blocks a threshold, do not cross alone. I did not say thank you or sign off with anything that acknowledged the audience. I spoke in procedures because that is what remained useful. When the van's doors closed and we rolled away from the curb, I looked back and saw Marla standing on the lawn, Rook balanced in her arms, and the living room window dark and blank. The street lamp blinked once and then steadied. Liam sat back and exhaled. We have new vector data. We can trace 2 more probable houses tonight. His voice was flat and functional. That was enough for the moment. The chapter concluded on a concrete beat. Liam pinged the map and a new cluster lit on the tablet. I engaged the relay and cued the feed for archive. Marla signed a chain of custody form and carried Rook toward the van. The decision to move Rook into custody, to record the procedural changes, and to file a restricted log ended the immediate conflict while leaving the contamination's larger arc open to the next relay. I sealed the file, hit the record marker, and the channel looped on a looping static tone as the relay drove away into the night.